How we doing, guys? This is Mr. Striz, and we're checking into our Biology Academy. Today's LEQ up here at the top is list the variables of the scientific method and identify those variables. So when you think about the scientific method, it's something you've heard growing up all through probably elementary school, middle school, and definitely high school. And the scientific method is, it's something we actually do every day. And it's not an everyday thing we do in science, but you kind of do make decisions, you make observations based on what happens, you kind of make a conclusion based off it. So the first thing we're looking at is what are the steps to the scientific method. And how I'm going to relate this to you guys, I'm going to relate it to like a game, per se like a football or basketball game. So the first thing we do when it comes to looking at a game or looking at the scientific method, we want to ask a question. So we look at this question and go, what question are we trying to answer here? And then relating it to, possibly an event. That question can be, how are we going to stop this team? So we have our question, and then from there we want to do some background research. You're going to watch film, right? So you're going to watch film on this team so you can kind of see, what way they kind of lean, whether they're more like a run team, a pass team, what type of offense or defense they're running. So that's how we do the background research. Now, after the background research, once we do our background research, the big thing comes out, and it's to construct a hypothesis. And then when it relates to that in a game, that's like we're going to stop the run. So we asked the question, how are we going to stop this team? We did background research by watching the film. And then after that research, we construct a hypothesis. If we stop the run, we could possibly beat this team. So you get that hypothesis there. And then the next thing after that is you test your hypothesis doing an experiment. Now, the way you test your hypothesis doing an experiment come game time is you play the game, right? Based on that hypothesis that you're going to stop the run, we're going to see how that goes by playing the game. So after you test your hypothesis, the next thing you got to do is analyze your data and draw a conclusion. So how that relates to our game here, what we're going to do is, did we win or lose? So based on, we're going to stop the run. We play the game. At the end of the game, did we win or lose? You're analyzing that data you did by just, looking at that data, seeing if it matches up to that hypothesis or not. Now, there's actually one more step, and this is kind of the most important steps when it comes to the scientific method, is you report your results. Was your hypothesis correct? And when it comes to game time on that one, you let the other teams know the report. So you had a game against Golden Gate, and based on your hypothesis, you analyze your data. Did you win or lose? And then you kind of give that report to possibly other teams. This team is true. You got to stop the run. If you stop the run, you can win this game. So going back over that again, the steps of the scientific method. Ask a question. You ask a question. You make observations, right? You ask the question. Why do plants need water? You do background research. What's important. How do plants receive food? How do they make food? Photosynthesis, all that. Then you construct your hypothesis. If plants receive water, then they will grow. You test your hypothesis. You make an experiment. And then you analyze your data and draw a conclusion based off of that experiment there and report your results. Remember, reporting the results, you got to have peer review. It's super important in science. Now, so we know the steps to the scientific method. We got to look at the variables now. So let's look at those variables. So the two different variables we're going to actually be looking at is the independent variable and the dependent variable. So if you notice that the independent variable on this picture, it influences the change in the dependent variable. So what happens is that the independent variable is a variable that is changed by the scientist. So that's the variable that the scientist wants to change. We go back to that experiment I said earlier about how much, water do plants need to grow. If plants receive more water, then they grow taller. So in that experiment, the independent variable would be the amount of water the plants would receive, because that's a variable the scientist is changing there. Now, when we look at the dependent variable is a variable that is measured in response to the independent variable. So we have these plants, they're receiving different amounts of water. And remember, we want to see if they would grow taller. So that's the height of the plant would be the dependent variable because that's the one we're measuring. We're trying to see how tall these plants are going to grow based on how much water they had, aka the independent variable. And there's one more variable that's very important into an experiment, and that's going to be your control, the control group. So what the control group is a group that is held constant and does not change. So it's when you conduct an experiment, you got to have, it doesn't have to be a group, it can be, you got to have a variable where like it's not receiving the different amounts of water. It's the one you're going to test it against. So you have the control group to see, if that independent variable does actually affect the dependent variable per se. So that control group is very important because it's the one that holds constant and it does not change. It's the one that doesn't receive that change there. Now moving on, and it's a little important that you know exactly where these variables are, specifically the independent and dependent variable are on a graph. So let's take a look at this graph. So we have this graph here, and it's the dependence of traffic ticket costs on automobile speed. So notice you have the speed down here, and then you have the cost of the average ticket, the cost of the average speeding ticket. So obviously the faster you go, the higher the speeding ticket is. So when looking at this, we're looking at what did they change? We're looking at the independent variable here. And so here, what the scientist was changing per se was the automobile speed or the car speed. So that's your independent variable. The independent variable is found on this x-axis here. Now, based on the cost of the speed, we wanted to measure the average cost of the speeding ticket. That is on the y-axis here. And remember, the one that you measure is that dependent variable because we're seeing that change on the independent variable, from the independent variable. So the independent variable is found on the x-axis, whereas the dependent variable is found on the y-axis. So that sums up our video on the scientific method. Make sure you answer that LEQ at the top in your summary, and then make sure you take that quiz on USA Test Prep, and then move on to that vocabulary activity. This is Mr. Shiz signing out.